Welcome to a quiet journey through one of history's most misunderstood lives. Tonight, we're unraveling the real Cleopatra, a woman whose story was rewritten by her enemies so thoroughly that even now, 2,000 years later, we're still discovering how different she was from the Hollywood seductress. Whether you're settling in for sleep or simply escaping into ancient history, I'm glad you're here. If you're comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. What city, what country, what time zone? There's something connecting about how ancient stories can reach across the world. If these long historical journeys help you find rest, consider subscribing. There are many more stories waiting. What you're about to hear isn't about beauty or romance. It's about a polyglot scholar, a naval commander, and a political genius who nearly changed the course of Western civilization. This is the story her enemies tried to bury. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The World. Before Cleopatra. Picture the Mediterranean world in 69 BCE, the year a particular child was born in Alexandria. The Roman Republic had been expanding for centuries, swallowing city after city around the Mediterranean rim. But Rome itself was beginning to fracture from within. Ambitious generals fighting each other, senators plotting assassinations, the machinery of republican government straining under the weight of empire. In the East, things looked different. The remnants of Alexander the Great's conquests still commanded vast wealth. Syria, Asia Minor, and Egypt, these were kingdoms with centuries of accumulated riches, cities that made Rome look provincial, libraries and temples that took your breath away. Egypt in particular remained something Rome couldn't quite digest. It was the richest kingdom in the known world. Its capital, Alexandria, held perhaps 500,000 people from every corner of 3 continents. The great lighthouse guided ships into harbors that never slept. Grain flowed from the Nile Delta to feed half the Mediterranean. But Egypt's rulers weren't Egyptian, not in the old sense. They were Greeks, descendants of one of Alexander's generals. When Alexander died young in Babylon in 323 BCE, his empire shattered. His generals carved it up like wolves over a carcass. Ptolemy, clever and quick, claimed Egypt. He and his descendants would rule for 300 years, blending Greek culture with ancient Egyptian traditions in ways both fascinating and strange. They built Greek-style libraries and theaters, while also commissioning hieroglyphic inscriptions and participating in pharaonic rituals thousands of years old. The Ptolemies spoke Greek among themselves, worshipped Greek gods in private, yet appeared in public as divine pharaohs wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. It was a performance, really, a 3-century-long political theater. And like all performances, it required the audience to suspend disbelief. By 69 BCE, that suspension was wearing thin. The Ptolemies were weakening. Roman merchants filled Alexandria's streets. Roman creditors held increasing shares of Egyptian debt. Several Ptolemaic rulers had already accepted Roman protection, a polite phrase that meant subordination without formal conquest. The question wasn't whether Egypt would eventually fall under Roman control, but when, and whether it would retain any independence at all. Into this world of borrowed power and fading glory, a daughter was born to Ptolemy XII. Her name was Cleopatra, the 7th Egyptian queen to bear it, and she would refuse to accept that the performance was all that remained. Chapter 2. A Palace Education. Childhood in the palace at Alexandria meant growing up at the crossroads of the known world. Imagine marble halls cooled by sea breezes, courtyards with fountains that caught the afternoon light, libraries where scrolls contained the accumulated wisdom of centuries, mathematics from Babylon, philosophy from Athens, medicine from Egypt's most ancient texts. Cleopatra's education was extraordinary, even by royal standards. The finest scholars in Alexandria served as her tutors. She learned Greek literature, Homer's epics, Plato's dialogues, Aristotle's logic. She studied mathematics, astronomy, rhetoric, the arts of debate and persuasion. But most Ptolemaic children stopped there. Cleopatra didn't. She made a choice that broke 3 centuries of dynastic tradition. She learned Egyptian, not just a few ceremonial phrases, but fluency. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who could speak directly to native Egyptian subjects without interpreters, who could read the hieroglyphic inscriptions in temples older than her dynasty. The decision tells you something about her mind. She understood that real power required connection, that symbolic gestures mattered, that language wasn't just communication, but legitimacy. She wouldn't stop at 2 languages. Ancient sources tell us she eventually mastered 9: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Aramaic, Hebrew, and several languages from kingdoms to the south and east. When foreign ambassadors arrived, she could speak to them directly, reading their reactions, catching nuances that interpreters might miss. Think about what that preparation meant: the hours of study, the discipline. Outside her windows, Alexandria hummed with commerce. Greek philosophers debated in the agora. Egyptian priests tended ancient temples. Jewish scholars discussed scripture. Roman merchants negotiated contracts. Arabian traders sold exotic goods from distant lands. The city itself was an education in cultural complexity. The Great Library, one of the ancient world's wonders, stood near the palace. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls organized in vast halls. Scholars traveled from across the Mediterranean to study there, to access knowledge available nowhere else. Young Cleopatra had access to all of it, but her education extended beyond books and languages. She was learning politics in the most practical way possible, by watching her father navigate an impossible situation. Ptolemy XII had a problem. The Alexandrian elite resented him. They viewed him as too accommodating to Rome, too willing to pay tribute, too weak to maintain Egyptian independence. His critics called him the flute player because of his love of music, a nickname that dripped with contempt. In 58 BCE, when Cleopatra was 11, her father was driven from Alexandria by a popular uprising. The royal family fled into exile. The experience was traumatic for a child, but it was also instructive. Cleopatra learned that even 3,000-year-old dynasties could fall, that popular support mattered, that political power was more fragile than marble palaces suggested. The exile took them to Rome. There, the young princess observed the Republic's machinery up close. She met the senators and generals who controlled Roman policy toward the east. She watched her father negotiate for military support, promising tribute and concessions in exchange for the legions that would restore him to power. She saw how Romans viewed these arrangements, not as alliances between equals, but as investments expecting returns, not as friendship, but as leverage. 3 years later, in 55 BCE, Ptolemy XII returned to Alexandria with Roman military backing. The restoration came at enormous cost, both financial and political. Egypt was now effectively a Roman client state. Roman troops remained in Alexandria. Tribute payments drained the treasury. The kingdom's independence was more appearance than reality. Teenage Cleopatra spent the next years learning to operate within these constraints. She built relationships with military commanders. She cultivated support among Egyptian priests who legitimized pharaonic authority. She studied administration with the bureaucrats who actually ran the complex governmental machinery. Most importantly, she was developing a strategy. She couldn't openly oppose Roman influence. That would be suicide. But she also couldn't simply accept permanent subordination. That would make her dynasty pointless. Egypt just another conquered territory. Her solution required patience. Work within the Roman system while gradually building Egypt's strength. Demonstrate value as an ally while preparing for the day when circumstances might shift. Master every skill necessary for effective leadership. The opportunity to put these preparations to use came sooner than anyone expected. In 51 BCE, when Cleopatra was just 18, her father died suddenly. The throne of Egypt fell to his eldest surviving child. Chapter 3. First Reign and Exile. According to Ptolemaic tradition, Cleopatra would rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was 10 years old. The co-rulership arrangement was meant to maintain dynastic legitimacy, while ensuring real power remained with the more experienced ruler. In theory, Cleopatra would govern while her brother grew to adulthood. But theory rarely survives contact with palace politics. The kingdom Cleopatra inherited was in crisis. The treasury groaned under debt to Roman creditors. The military was neglected and weakening. The nobility was fractured into competing factions, and she was 18 years old, female, and ruling with a child brother surrounded by ambitious men. Those men, particularly Pothinus the eunuch and General Achilles, had no intention of letting a teenage girl actually govern. They saw the boy king as a more manageable option, someone they could control while advancing their own interests. The economic situation was particularly dire. Years of tribute payments to Rome had steadily drained Egyptian wealth. Recent Nile floods had been irregular, reducing agricultural yields. Food shortages threatened social stability. Cleopatra's response revealed the sophistication of her training. Rather than trying to address every crisis, simultaneously, she prioritized. First, establish control over the governmental bureaucracy. Second, stabilize the economy through practical reforms. Third, navigate the dangerous Roman civil war that was erupting across the Mediterranean. That third challenge proved decisive. News arrived that Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, the two most powerful men in the Roman world, were leading armies against each other in a conflict that would determine the Republic's future. Both sides were seeking support from client kingdoms throughout the East. Cleopatra recognized this Roman civil war as both immense danger and extraordinary opportunity. Choose the winning side, and Egypt might gain greater independence. Choose wrong and face invasion, conquest, complete destruction of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Her brother's advisors wanted to support Pompey. He had previously helped restore Ptolemy XII, they argued. He represented continuity with existing arrangements. Supporting him was safer. But Cleopatra had studied both men during her time in Rome. Pompey represented the traditional Roman aristocracy. They viewed Eastern kingdoms primarily as sources of wealth to exploit. Caesar, despite his reputation for ruthlessness, had shown more flexibility, more interest in sustainable alliances than simple extraction. More importantly, Cleopatra's intelligence networks provided better information than her brother's faction possessed. Her sources suggested Caesar's forces were better organized, more motivated, more likely to win despite being outnumbered. His innovative tactics and veteran legions gave him advantages that traditional observers were missing. The disagreement over Roman policy created an irreconcilable split. Ptolemy XIII's advisors convinced him that his sister's policies threatened Egypt's survival, that he should assert his authority as the senior male ruler. In 48 BCE, they orchestrated a palace coup. Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria and seek refuge in the Point countryside. This exile represented the greatest crisis of her young life. Most rulers in her position would have negotiated a compromise, accepted diminished authority, tried to work within the new arrangement. Cleopatra chose differently. She would bet everything on a strategy so audacious that even her closest supporters questioned her judgment. She would seek a personal alliance with Julius Caesar himself. The decision required traveling secretly across the Mediterranean, penetrating Roman military lines, and gaining access to Caesar while he was conducting active military operations. If successful, the alliance could restore her to power and transform Egypt's relationship with Rome. If it failed, she would likely face execution as a traitor. The journey that would change ancient history began on a moonless night in autumn of 48 BCE. Cleopatra and a small group of loyal supporters boarded a merchant vessel at a remote harbor along Egypt's Mediterranean coast. Their destination? Alexandria, where Caesar had recently arrived after defeating Pompey's forces at the Battle of Pharsalus. The voyage was extraordinarily dangerous. Roman naval patrols controlled the waters around Alexandria. Ptolemy XIII's forces were actively searching for the exiled queen. Discovery meant immediate capture and probable execution. But Cleopatra had spent months planning every detail. The ship carrying her was disguised as a routine commercial vessel. She herself was concealed among the cargo in a way that later became legend, though ancient sources disagree on the exact method. What matters is the deception succeeded. Under cover of darkness, the ship entered Alexandria's harbor and docked at a wharf controlled by merchants loyal to Cleopatra. From there, she was smuggled into the palace complex where Caesar had established his headquarters. Secret passages, loyal servants, moving through the heart of enemy territory to reach the most dangerous man in the Roman world. The moment when Cleopatra revealed herself to Julius Caesar would become one of history's most famous encounters. Though the actual details remain shrouded in legend and propaganda, what is certain, the meeting between the 21-year-old Egyptian queen and the 52-year-old Roman general would forge an alliance that reshaped the Mediterranean world. Chapter 4. Caesar comes to Egypt. To understand why Caesar was in Egypt at all, we need to step back a few weeks. After defeating Pompey at Pharsalus in central Greece, Caesar had pursued his rival eastward. Pompey fled to Egypt, calculating that the kingdom he had previously helped would offer sanctuary. He calculated wrong. When Pompey's ship approached the beach at Pelusium, Egyptian officials rowed out to greet him. They appeared friendly, even deferential. Pompey boarded their small boat, leaving his wife and officers on the ship. As the boat reached shallow water, the Egyptians drew their swords. Pompey was murdered in front of his wife's eyes. His head was cut off, his body left on the beach. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, Pothinus and Achillas, had made a calculation. They believed killing Caesar's enemy would win Roman favor, would make Caesar grateful to Egypt. They were catastrophically wrong about human psychology. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria days later and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he wept. Modern historians debate whether the tears were genuine or theatrical. Caesar and Pompey had been rivals, yes, but also former allies, even family through marriage. More importantly, Romans had complex feelings about dignity and proper death. Pompey deserved to be defeated by Roman arms in Roman fashion, not butchered on a foreign beach by foreigners. The assassination disgusted Caesar. It also gave him justification for what came next. Caesar announced that as Roman consul, he had authority to arbitrate disputes in Egypt's royal family. He declared that both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII should present their cases, and he would render a judgment that would be binding. This proclamation was audacious. Egypt wasn't technically a Roman province. Caesar had no formal jurisdiction, but he had 4,000 legionaries in Alexandria, and Ptolemy XIII's advisors had just handed him moral authority by murdering Pompey. Pothinus and Achillas were trapped. If they refused Caesar's arbitration, they appeared to be resisting legitimate Roman authority. If they accepted, they put their carefully orchestrated coup at risk. The young Ptolemy XIII was brought to the palace, ostensibly to participate in the hearing, actually becoming Caesar's hostage. And that's when Cleopatra made her move. The smuggling story, whether she arrived concealed in a carpet, a laundry sack, or some other means, has been told and retold for 2,000 years. Ancient sources differ on the details. What matters is the boldness of the act. A 21-year-old woman penetrating Roman and Egyptian security to reach Caesar directly, gambling everything on a single meeting. Chapter 5. The meeting that changed everything. Caesar was reportedly impressed from the first moments, not necessarily by physical beauty. Roman writers who described her agreed she wasn't conventionally beautiful by their standards, but by intelligence, courage, and political sophistication. Here was someone who had risked everything on a desperate gamble, demonstrating exactly the kind of boldness Caesar valued. Cleopatra spoke to him in fluent Latin. No interpreter, no intermediary, just direct communication between two highly educated minds. She presented her case methodically. Her brother's advisors had violated ancient Egyptian law by usurping royal authority from the rightful heir. She offered evidence of their corruption and mismanagement. She outlined detailed plans for restoring Egypt's prosperity and maintaining alliance with Rome. When Ptolemy XIII's representatives spoke, through interpreters notably, could only repeat claims that the young king was legitimate ruler and his sister's presence constituted rebellion. Their arguments seemed weak and unconvincing compared to Cleopatra's sophisticated presentation. But this wasn't really a legal hearing. It was a negotiation between Caesar and Cleopatra, with both parties calculating mutual benefit. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth to support his continuing campaigns against remaining Republican forces. He needed a stable, reliable ally controlling the Mediterranean's grain supply. He needed to resolve the Egyptian situation quickly so he could return to more pressing matters. Cleopatra offered all of that. She also offered something less tangible but perhaps more valuable: partnership rather than subordination. An ally who could think strategically, who understood both Eastern and Roman politics, who could help him manage the complex Eastern Mediterranean without constant Roman supervision. The alliance that emerged was based on mutual benefit, though personal attraction certainly played a role. Caesar agreed to restore Cleopatra to the Egyptian throne and provide Roman military support against her brother's faction. In exchange, she would provide Egypt's resources to support Caesar's political objectives and ensure Egyptian cooperation with Roman strategic interests. But implementing this agreement required overcoming significant obstacles. Within hours of Cleopatra's arrival at the palace, Pothinus and Achillas recognized the threat. They mobilized the 20,000 troops of the Egyptian royal guard, surrounding the palace complex and demanding Caesar surrender the exiled queen to face judgment. Caesar found himself in an extraordinarily precarious position. His forces numbered fewer than 4,000 legionaries, vastly outnumbered by the Egyptian army that now controlled the city's streets and harbors. His ships were trapped. His supply lines were severed. Any conventional military assessment would conclude his situation was hopeless. But Caesar hadn't conquered Gaul through conventional thinking. He recognized that this crisis represented an opportunity. If he could emerge victorious despite overwhelming odds, every client kingdom from Syria to Cyprus would understand that Roman friendship was worth preserving, and Roman enmity too dangerous to risk. What followed was one of the most dramatic sieges in ancient history. Chapter 6. The Alexandrian War. The siege lasted weeks. Caesar's small force of legionaries defended the royal palace complex against repeated assaults by vastly superior Egyptian numbers. Roman engineering skill and discipline barely compensated for the numerical disadvantage. The fighting raged day and night. Egyptian forces tried cutting off the palace's water supply. They threatened food stores. They launched coordinated assaults from multiple directions, trying to overwhelm Roman defensive positions. But Roman military training was simply superior. Small units of legionaries could hold key positions against much larger forces. Roman engineers constantly improvised new defenses, new tactics, new ways to maximize their advantages. Caesar also launched nighttime raids. Small teams would strike Egyptian camps and supply depots, creating confusion and undermining morale. Troops who had expected an easy victory found themselves constantly harassed, never quite secure. The turning point came when Caesar made an audacious decision. He ordered Roman engineers to set fire to Egyptian ships moored near the palace, preventing them from reinforcing the siege. The flames spread beyond their intended targets. The fire reached warehouses along the waterfront, then spread further into the city. According to ancient sources, it eventually reached the Great Library of Alexandria, destroying thousands of irreplaceable scrolls. Modern historians debate exactly how much damage the library suffered. Some argue it was partially destroyed, others that it was spared, but nearby warehouses containing scrolls were lost. Either way, it represented cultural tragedy in service of military necessity. But the fire achieved Caesar's strategic objective: chaos throughout the city allowed him to break out of the palace and establish more defensible positions along the harbor front. From there, his forces could receive supplies and reinforcements from Roman ships that managed to penetrate the Egyptian blockade. Cleopatra played a crucial role during the siege. She used her knowledge of Alexandria's layout and her connections among the city's diverse population to gather intelligence and coordinate resistance activities. Her ability to communicate with Egyptians in their own language proved invaluable for maintaining popular support and countering propaganda from her brother's faction. The siege finally ended when Roman reinforcements arrived from Syria. With fresh troops, Caesar launched a decisive assault on Egyptian positions. The battle demonstrated the tactical superiority of Roman legions over traditional Eastern armies, even when Romans were significantly outnumbered. Ptolemy XIII was killed during the fighting. Ancient sources disagree whether he died in battle or through assassination by his own supporters, hoping to escape Roman vengeance by eliminating the focal point of resistance. Pothinus and Achillas were captured and executed. The immediate threat to Cleopatra's rule was eliminated, while a clear message was sent about the consequences of opposing Roman policy. With her rivals dead and Caesar's legions controlling Alexandria, Cleopatra was finally secure on the throne. But victory came at enormous cost. The siege had damaged Alexandria's infrastructure. Trade throughout the eastern Mediterranean was disrupted. Egyptian military weakness had been demonstrated to potential enemies throughout the region. More importantly, Egypt's dependence on Roman protection was now more obvious than ever before. Cleopatra owed her throne directly to Caesar's intervention. That created obligations that would influence Egyptian policy for years. She had achieved her immediate objective, regaining power, but at the price of accepting a relationship with Rome that offered limited room for independent action. Still, she had won. Against steep odds, with nothing but audacity and preparation, she had won. And now came the interesting part, proving she could actually govern effectively. Chapter 7. The Nile Journey. Caesar remained in Alexandria for months after the siege, officially to ensure political stability, actually to enjoy the luxury and intellectual civilization that Egyptian civilization could provide. This extended stay deepened his relationship with Cleopatra beyond initial political alliance into something that combined genuine affection with continued strategic cooperation. The most famous symbol of this period was a voyage up the Nile. Ancient sources describe a flotilla of 400 ships moving slowly upriver. Thousands of courtiers and servants, soldiers providing security, scholars and philosophers invited for evening discussions. The journey took weeks. Caesar saw monuments that were already ancient when Rome was founded, temples with hieroglyphic inscriptions carved thousands of years before, pyramids that had stood for over 2 millennia. Imagine those evenings on the river, the sun setting over the Nile Valley, oil lamps lit on the royal barge, Cleopatra and Caesar discussing philosophy, governance, the challenges of ruling diverse populations. These weren't idle, romantic conversations. They were intensive exchanges of knowledge. Caesar learned about Egyptian administration, the bureaucratic systems that had governed the Nile Valley for millennia. Cleopatra learned about Roman military organization, the logistics of conquest, the political culture of the Republic. One concrete outcome was calendrical reform. Egyptian astronomers had developed sophisticated understanding of solar cycles. Their insights would influence Caesar's later creation of the Julian calendar, which formed the basis for our modern calendar. During this period, Cleopatra became pregnant. She gave birth to a son in 47 BCE. She named him Ptolemy XV Caesar, though everyone called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. The child represented both opportunity and complication. He was potentially a bridge between Egyptian and Roman civilizations, a living symbol of partnership between the two powers. But he was also a problem for Roman politics. Caesar had no legitimate male heir in Rome. Caesarion's existence raised uncomfortable questions about succession, legitimacy, Caesar's relationship with foreign powers. Roman observers noted these complications with increasing unease. Eventually, duty called Caesar away from Egypt. He needed to complete his campaigns against remaining Republican forces. He had political enemies in Rome who were spreading rumors about his eastern entanglements. Couldn't stay in Alexandria forever. When his ships finally departed, they left behind a transformed Egypt. The kingdom was more closely integrated with Roman power than ever before. But Cleopatra had also gained knowledge, resources, and political connections necessary to navigate the complex challenges ahead. The queen, who had risked everything on a desperate gamble, had emerged victorious. But her triumph was only the beginning. Chapter 8. Rebuilding Egypt. With Caesar gone and her position secured, Cleopatra faced the unglamorous work of governing. No more dramatic sieges, no more desperate gambits, just the daily challenge of managing one of the ancient world's most complex economies while preparing for an uncertain future. Her first priority was administrative reconstruction. The palace bureaucracy had suffered significant losses during the civil conflict. Many experienced officials had been killed or had fled. New personnel were needed, but they had to possess both technical competence and political reliability. Cleopatra's approach revealed sophisticated understanding of how power actually functioned. She didn't simply promote existing officials or appoint personal favorites. She conducted systematic evaluations, considering technical skills, political reliability, and ability to work collaboratively. She created new positions allowing talented individuals from diverse backgrounds to contribute. Greek scholars were appointed to manage diplomatic correspondence. Egyptian priests received expanded roles in provincial administration, recognizing their influence with local populations. Even some Roman residents of Alexandria were incorporated into advisory positions. This inclusive approach served multiple strategic purposes. It demonstrated commitment to representing all segments of Egyptian society rather than favoring particular groups. It created broader political support by providing advancement opportunities for talented individuals. It gave Cleopatra multiple perspectives on policy challenges. The economic reconstruction required even more care. Recent conflicts had disrupted trade routes throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Agricultural production had suffered. Rebuilding damaged infrastructure strained the treasury. Cleopatra implemented practical reforms. She negotiated more favorable terms with Roman creditors, arguing that Egypt's long-term ability to repay debts depended on maintaining resources for productive investment. She restructured internal taxation to reduce burdens on farmers and merchants, while ensuring adequate governmental revenues. She launched new trading initiatives, capitalizing on Egypt's strategic position between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Alexandria's ports were expanded and modernized. New trade agreements were negotiated with kingdoms throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Egyptian grain exports were supplemented by luxury goods and exotic materials from the African interior. These economic policies demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how political power and economic prosperity reinforced each other. By strengthening Egypt's financial position, she reduced dependence on Roman support while creating resources for building military capabilities and purchasing diplomatic influence. But her most delicate challenge was managing the symbolic aspects of rule. To native Egyptians, she needed to appear as legitimate pharaoh, heir to 3,000 years of tradition, divine protector of Ma'at, cosmic order, participant in ancient rituals that maintained the balance between human and divine worlds. To Greeks in Alexandria, she needed to be sophisticated Hellenistic monarch, educated, cultured, patron of arts and philosophy, embodiment of Greek civilization in Egypt. To Roman observers, she needed to demonstrate competent, reliable administration, a partner who could be trusted to govern effectively without constant supervision. Each audience required different performance. Egyptian temples. She appeared in traditional pharaonic regalia, performing rituals in the Egyptian language, commissioning hieroglyphic inscriptions that presented her in ancient formulas. In Alexandria's Greek theaters and libraries, she sponsored philosophical discussions, supported artistic endeavors, engaged with intellectual culture. In correspondence with Roman officials, she emphasized practical administration, reliable tribute payments, cooperation on strategic matters. The balancing act required extraordinary discipline. One misstep, appearing too foreign to Romans, too Greek to Egyptians, too weak to anyone, could undermine the careful legitimacy she was constructing. And then came news that changed everything. Caesar wanted her in Rome. Chapter 9. Cleopatra in Rome. The invitation was both honor and summons. Caesar was celebrating his victories with elaborate triumphs, ritual processions through Rome displaying captured treasures and defeated enemies. He wanted Cleopatra present to witness his glory. She arrived in 46 BCE. Caesar housed her in his villa across the Tiber River, along with young Caesarion and a large retinue of Egyptian attendants and scholars. Her presence in Rome caused immediate scandal. Part of the problem was simply that she was there, a foreign monarch residing in the capital, meeting with senators and generals, visibly close to Caesar. Romans were deeply suspicious of foreign influence on their leaders. Part was gender. Roman culture gave women limited public roles. The idea of a woman wielding independent political power, negotiating as an equal with Roman men, was profoundly uncomfortable. Part was the child. Caesarion's existence raised obvious questions about Caesar's intentions. Did he plan to establish a dynasty? To rule as monarch rather than republican magistrate? To orient Rome toward the east? These fears weren't baseless. Caesar was accumulating unprecedented power. He had been appointed dictator, temporary emergency position, but kept extending the term. He was implementing reforms that centralized authority. He accepted honors that seemed uncomfortably monarchical. Cleopatra's presence amplified all these concerns. Roman aristocrats who met her acknowledged her intelligence. The famous orator Cicero wrote letters mentioning her. He found her cultured and educated, but he also resented her influence and what she represented. Egyptian scholars she brought introduced Roman intellectuals to mathematical and astronomical knowledge from Alexandria's library. There were genuine intellectual exchanges, real cultural dialogue. But underneath was constant political tension. Romans like Cicero saw Cleopatra as dangerous foreign influence. They worried Caesar was being seduced, not necessarily by beauty, though Romans liked that narrative, but by Eastern models of kingship, by the idea of concentrated power justified through divine right. These concerns were planting seeds. The propaganda that would later define Cleopatra, foreign seductress corrupting Roman virtue, was already taking root during this visit. Roman historians writing decades later would elaborate and exaggerate, but the basic narrative started here. Cleopatra seemed unaware of the hostility building against her. Or perhaps she simply had no choice. Egypt needed Roman support. Caesar was her protector. Maintaining their alliance required accepting the discomfort her presence caused. She was still in Rome in March of 44 BCE, still meeting with senators, still discussing philosophy with Roman intellectuals, still appearing at Caesar's side at public events. And then, on the Ides of March, the 15th day of the month, everything shattered. Caesar was scheduled to attend a Senate meeting. A group of senators, led by men claiming to defend Republican liberty, had prepared an ambush. When Caesar arrived at the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting, the conspirators surrounded him. They drew daggers. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. He died at the foot of Pompey's statue, a detail that ancient writers noted with bitter irony. The assassination plunged Rome into chaos. Caesar's supporters scattered, his enemies celebrated. The Senate debated what came next. Mobs formed in the streets. And Cleopatra found herself alone and exposed in a hostile city, her protector dead, her son's future threatened, her kingdom's security suddenly uncertain. She waited just long enough to assess the situation. Then she gathered Caesarion and her retinue and departed Rome with as much dignity as she could muster. Not panicked flight, but strategic withdrawal. The voyage back to Alexandria must have been tense. Everything she had built over the past 6 years rested on alliance with Caesar. Now he was gone. Rome was descending into civil war. Where did that leave Egypt? The answer would depend on who emerged victorious from the chaos Caesar's assassination had unleashed. And once again, Cleopatra would need to choose sides carefully. Chapter 10. After the assassination. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra waited. She had learned patience during her education and first exile. She knew that rushing to judgment during confused situations led to catastrophic errors. The intelligence reports from her network of merchants and diplomats painted a complex picture. Rome was fragmenting into multiple factions. Caesar's assassins, men like Brutus and Cassius, claimed to have restored republican liberty. Caesar's supporters, particularly Mark Antony, his loyal general, sought revenge. And Caesar's adopted heir, a young man named Octavian, was maneuvering for position despite being only 18 years old. Cleopatra's initial assessment was that the assassins would lose. They had killed Caesar, but had no coherent plan for what came next. They had military experience, but limited support among Caesar's veteran legions. They were politicians trying to solve problems that required military solutions. The real question was whether Caesar's supporters would unite or fragment. Antony was the obvious leader, experienced general, charismatic speaker, Caesar's trusted lieutenant for years. But Octavian had legal legitimacy as Caesar's adopted son and heir. The potential for conflict between them was obvious. For now, they formed an alliance. Antony, Octavian, and another general named Lepidus created what history calls the Second Triumvirate, 3 men agreeing to share power and hunt Caesar's assassins together. Their first acts were brutal. They compiled proscription lists, names of political enemies whose property would be confiscated and who could be killed with impunity. Hundreds of senators and wealthy Romans were murdered, their assets seized to fund military campaigns. Among the victims was Cicero, the famous orator who had resented Cleopatra's presence in Rome. The triumvirs then marched east to confront Brutus and Cassius, who had assembled their own armies in Greece and Asia Minor. As the two sides prepared for battle, both sent requests to Egypt. Brutus and Cassius wanted Egyptian support, grain, gold, ships. Antony and Octavian wanted the same. Cleopatra's position was delicate. She personally favored Caesar's avengers. They represented continuity with the alliance that had restored her to power. But she couldn't afford to back the losing side. Her solution was masterful diplomatic ambiguity. She provided limited support to both sides, just enough to avoid making enemies, not enough to be counted as fully committed. She sent grain shipments that mysteriously suffered delays. She promised ships that somehow weren't ready on schedule. To Roman observers, it looked like Egyptian inefficiency, or bad weather, or logistical challenges. Actually, it was calculated neutrality. The decisive battle came at Philippi in 42 BCE. The triumvirs crushed the Republican army. Brutus and Cassius both died, by suicide according to Roman tradition rather than face capture. Caesar's assassins were eliminated. Now came the question of division of spoils. The triumvirs agreed to split the Roman world geographically. Octavian would control the west, Italy, Gaul, Spain. Lepidus received Africa. Antony was assigned the east, Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, and oversight of Egypt. For Cleopatra, this meant her future relationship with Rome would be mediated through Mark Antony. She knew relatively little about him beyond his military reputation. They had never met. She didn't know his political skills, his strategic thinking, his personality. And then came a summons. Antony, now established in Asia Minor and organizing the eastern provinces, sent word that the Queen of Egypt should meet him at Tarsus in modern-day southern Turkey. Technically a request, actually a command. The phrasing was polite, but the meaning clear. The new Roman authority in the East wanted to establish terms of relationship with Egypt's ruler. Cleopatra spent weeks preparing her response. She understood that first impressions would shape subsequent negotiations, that she needed to demonstrate power without threatening, wealth without subordination, capability without appearing too independent. Most importantly, she recognized this was performance, political theater on the grandest scale. And if there was one thing 300 years of Ptolemaic rule had taught her, it was how to stage a spectacle. Chapter 11. The Triumvirate forms. Let's pause to understand what the Triumvirate actually meant for the Mediterranean world. 3 men were dividing the Roman Republic among themselves like property. This wasn't normal governance. It was barely disguised autocracy wrapped in republican language. Octavian, in the West, was young and relatively inexperienced in warfare. His strength was political maneuvering. He was Caesar's legal heir, which gave him legitimacy. He was ruthless in dealing with enemies, but he had yet to prove himself as a military commander or administrator. Lepidus, assigned Africa, was essentially the weak link. He was there to balance the others, to provide a third vote when Antony and Octavian disagreed. But he lacked their political skill and military reputation. History would eventually push him aside. Antony, in the East, was the Triumvirate's military powerhouse. He was Caesar's most successful general. He was charismatic, popular with soldiers, experienced in governance. The eastern provinces were the richest part of the Roman world. Controlling them gave him enormous resources. But the East also presented enormous challenges. The Parthian Empire, based in what is now Iran and Iraq, was Rome's great rival. It had defeated Roman armies before. It threatened Rome's eastern territories and trade routes. Antony needed to address the Parthian threat. He also needed to organize the eastern provinces more efficiently. The Republican system of sending temporary governors who extracted maximum wealth in minimum time was creating instability. Local populations were being overtaxed. Client kingdoms were unreliable. Egypt was crucial to any Eastern strategy. It was the wealthiest Eastern kingdom, the Mediterranean's breadbasket, strategically positioned controlling sea routes between Europe and Africa. During the civil wars, Egypt had played both sides carefully. Cleopatra had avoided fully committing to any faction, which was smart diplomacy, but also meant her reliability was uncertain. Antony needed to establish clear terms. Would Egypt be cooperative ally or potential problem? Would Cleopatra support his policies or require constant management? Could he trust her with significant autonomy, or did she need closer supervision? These weren't romantic questions. They were practical calculations about how to govern a vast region with limited resources and numerous threats. The summons to Tarsus was Antony's first move in establishing relationship. The location was chosen carefully, not Alexandria, where Cleopatra would have home advantage, not Rome, where she would appear subordinate, but neutral territory in Asia Minor, where both could meet with roughly equal symbolic status. The timing was also calculated. Antony had spent months after Philippi organizing provincial administration, meeting with local rulers, assessing the East's strategic situation. He was ready for serious negotiation about Egypt's role in his emerging system. Cleopatra, receiving the summons in Alexandria, recognized all these elements. This wasn't social invitation. It was the opening move in a high-stakes negotiation that would determine Egypt's future relationship with Rome. She had approximately 6 weeks to prepare, to plan her arrival, to gather intelligence about Antony, his personality, his priorities, his political position, to decide how to present herself and what terms she would seek. The preparations consumed the palace. Ships were refitted and decorated. Clothing was designed. Gifts were selected. Every detail was debated and refined. Because Cleopatra understood something fundamental about power. The substance of negotiations mattered enormously, but so did the theater that surrounded them. How you arrived, how you presented yourself, how you staged the encounter. All these created psychological frameworks that influenced substantive discussions. Antony would expect an Egyptian queen. She would give him one, but on her terms, at her pace, with her carefully crafted presentation. The golden ships began their voyage north. Chapter 12. The Summons to Tarsus. The ancient sources describing Cleopatra's arrival at Tarsus read almost like fantasy. The most famous account comes from Plutarch, writing more than a century later based on earlier sources. He describes a ship with purple sails, silver oars rowed by crews moving in synchronized rhythm to flute music. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a gold cloth canopy, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. Beautiful attendants dressed as sea nymphs stood at the steering oars. Others wafted incense from burning censers. Music floated across the water as the ship moved slowly up the river Cydnus toward the city of Tarsus. Word spread that the goddess Aphrodite had come to meet the god Dionysus for the good of Asia. Now, we should be skeptical of these descriptions. Ancient writers loved dramatic scenes. They embellished details. They wrote for audiences who expected spectacle in their narratives. But the basic elements are probably accurate. Cleopatra certainly staged an elaborate arrival. She had weeks to plan and unlimited resources. She understood psychological impact. And ancient diplomatic culture absolutely included theatrical presentations meant to establish tone before substantive negotiations began. The key details to notice: this wasn't nervous subordinate arriving to plead with superior. This was powerful monarch arriving as near equal, demonstrating wealth and cultural sophistication, claiming symbolic status, Aphrodite, Isis, that elevated her beyond ordinary political calculation. The message was clear before a word was spoken. Antony had summoned her to Tarsus, but she was arriving on her own terms, with her own agenda, ready to negotiate partnership rather than accept subordination. Antony's initial reaction is telling. He had prepared a formal reception in Tarsus. He would sit in his general's tribunal in the forum, and Cleopatra would come to present herself for his judgment. Instead, she sent a polite invitation. Would the Roman general perhaps like to dine aboard her ship that evening? Antony accepted. Ancient sources describe the dinner with the same lavish detail they gave the arrival. The ship's interior was decorated with elaborate tapestries, gold and silver vessels, flowers, and intricate lighting. A banquet that impressed even Romans accustomed to luxury. Again, we can't verify every detail, but the general pattern makes sense. Cleopatra was establishing a framework for their relationship through carefully staged hospitality. Not subservient, not aggressive, gracious and impressive. The substantive negotiations happened over several days. Antony needed Egyptian cooperation for his administration of the East and eventual Parthian campaign. He needed reliable grain supplies. He needed Egypt to stop playing both sides during Roman civil conflicts. Cleopatra needed Roman protection from potential rivals and invasions. She needed autonomy in internal Egyptian affairs. She needed recognition as legitimate queen rather than merely Roman client. They found mutual benefit. Antony would recognize Cleopatra's authority in Egypt and support her against internal challenges. He would grant Egypt favorable trade terms and reduce tribute demands. Cleopatra would provide material support for Antony's eastern policies and Parthian campaign. She would ensure reliable grain exports to Roman territories. She would cooperate with Antony's strategic objectives. Crucially, they would frame their relationship as alliance between partners, rather than subordination of client to patron. This framing mattered enormously. In Roman culture, relationships with foreign powers were typically structured as hierarchy. Rome superior, foreign kingdoms inferior. Antony was offering Cleopatra something closer to equality, at least in public presentation. Why would he do that? Partly because Cleopatra had carefully demonstrated that she was more capable than typical client rulers. She spoke his language, understood Roman politics, could discuss military strategy and administrative policy with real sophistication. partly because the East required different approaches than Italy. The peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean had long histories of sophisticated kingdoms. They weren't Roman colonists or newly conquered tribes. Managing them required more subtle diplomacy than simple military dominance. And partly, we should acknowledge this, because personal chemistry mattered. Antony and Cleopatra seemed to have genuinely liked each other, not necessarily in Hollywood romantic sense, but as two experienced rulers who could work together effectively and enjoy each other's company. They agreed that Antony would winter in Alexandria. This extended stay would allow detailed planning for the Parthian campaign and deeper coordination of Egyptian and Roman interests in the East. It would also allow their partnership to develop beyond formal negotiation into something more personal. Chapter 13. The Arrival at Tarsus. The arrival itself deserves closer examination because it tells us so much about Cleopatra's strategic thinking. Ancient diplomacy wasn't like modern summit meetings in quiet conference rooms. It was performed in public, with audiences watching, with symbolic meanings layered into every gesture and costume choice. When Cleopatra chose to dress as Aphrodite, or more accurately as a Hellenistic fusion of Aphrodite and the Egyptian goddess Isis, she was making specific claims. In Greek tradition, Aphrodite represented beauty, love, and persuasive power. In Egyptian tradition, Isis was the Great Mother, the protector of pharaohs, the embodiment of divine female authority. By appearing as this dual deity, Cleopatra was speaking two cultural languages at once. To the Greek-speaking population of Asia Minor, she was a sophisticated Hellenistic queen. To Egyptians, she was the living goddess. To Antony, who associated himself with Dionysus, she was presenting herself as his divine counterpart. The spectacle on the river Cydnus was overwhelming. Ancient writers describe the scent of exotic perfumes drifting across the water before the ship even came into view. The silver oars struck the water in time to the music of flutes and harps. The sails were dyed Tyrian purple, a color so expensive that in Rome it was reserved for the highest magistrates. This wasn't vanity. It was political theater designed to disarm. Antony had set up his tribunal in the market square of Tarsus, expecting the Egyptian queen to come to him and answer for her conduct during the civil wars. He was the Roman triumvir, the conqueror, the judge. But the crowds in the market square abandoned him. They ran to the riverbank to see the spectacle. Antony was left sitting alone on his tribunal. He had lost the psychological advantage before the first meeting even took place. He couldn't summon her now. He had to acknowledge her presence. He sent a message inviting her to dinner. She replied that it would be better if he came to her. When Antony boarded her flagship that evening, he stepped into a world of carefully calculated luxury. The deck was illuminated by thousands of lights arranged in intricate geometric patterns. The dinner service was gold. The food was exquisite. Antony, who prided himself on being a soldier's general, rough, hardy, unpretentious, was dazzled. But beneath the gold plates and the lighting effects, serious work was being done. Over the next few days, the two leaders took the measure of each other. Antony found that Cleopatra wasn't just a wealthy monarch. She was quick-witted, humorous, and politically astute. She could drink with his soldiers, debate with his scholars, and negotiate with his diplomats. Cleopatra found that Antony wasn't merely a brute soldier. He was generous, enthusiastic, and seemingly less guarded than Caesar had been. He had a largeness of spirit that appealed to her. More importantly, their strategic interests aligned perfectly. Antony needed the wealth of Egypt to pay his legions and fund his planned invasion of Parthia. He needed the Egyptian fleet to secure the Mediterranean. Cleopatra needed security. She needed Antony to confirm her right to the throne and, crucially, to eliminate the last threat to her reign, her younger sister, Arsinoe, who was living in exile in Ephesus and still plotting against her. The deal was struck. Antony agreed to have Arsinoe executed, a brutal but necessary act in the ruthless calculus of Ptolemaic survival. He affirmed Cleopatra's status as Queen of Egypt. In return, she pledged her support for his Eastern administration. But the meeting at Tarsus produced something else, something neither perhaps expected: a genuine partnership. They agreed that Antony would not return immediately to Rome or his headquarters in Syria. Instead, he would come to Alexandria. He would spend the winter in Egypt. Chapter 14. The Alexandria Partnership. The winter of 41 to 40 BCE in Alexandria became legendary. Later Roman propaganda would portray it as a season of endless debauchery, with Antony and Cleopatra neglecting their duties to feast and drink. The reality was more complex. They did form a society they called the Inimitable Livers, a group of friends and courtiers who dined together and staged elaborate entertainments. Stories survive of them, wandering the streets of Alexandria in disguise at night, listening to what ordinary people were saying. But this period was also an intense diplomatic summit. Antony was seeing firsthand how the most sophisticated kingdom in the world was governed. He toured the bureaucracy, inspected the harbor facilities, and saw the wealth of the Nile Delta. For Cleopatra, hosting the Roman Triumvirate was a daily exercise in statecraft. She needed to keep him engaged, keep him impressed, and keep him loyal to Egyptian interests. She did this by being constantly interesting. Plutarch tells us she never left his side. She hunted with him, played dice with him, drank with him, and watched while he exercised with weapons. She adapted herself to his moods, matching his boisterous humor with her own sharp wit. It was during this winter that Cleopatra became pregnant again, this time with twins. But the political reality of the Roman world could not be ignored forever. In the spring of 40 BCE, urgent news arrived. The Parthians had invaded Roman territory in Syria, and in Italy, Antony's wife Fulvia and his brother Lucius had started a civil war against Octavian, a war they were losing. Antony had to leave. He departed Alexandria in a hurry, heading first to Tyre to assess the Parthian situation, then to Greece and Italy to deal with the collapse of his family's political fortunes. This is a part of the story often skipped in movies. Antony didn't just leave for a weekend. He was gone for nearly 4 years. During that time, he reconciled with Octavian. His wife Fulvia died, and to seal the new peace treaty with Octavian, Antony agreed to marry Octavian's sister, Octavia. It was a political marriage, but by all accounts it was a successful one for several years. Octavia was intelligent, virtuous, and capable. She bore Antony 2 daughters. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, a boy named Alexander Helios, the sun, and a girl named Cleopatra Selene, the moon. She ruled alone. For 3.5 years, she governed Egypt without Roman interference. She managed the economy, raised her 3 children, and watched the news from Rome carefully. She must have known about Antony's marriage. She must have wondered if the alliance was over. But she also knew the geopolitical reality hadn't changed. Antony still needed to fight the Parthians, and to fight the Parthians, he needed money. And the only person with enough money was the Queen of Egypt. Campaign. In 37 BCE, the inevitable happened. Antony, frustrated by delays and needing resources for his great Eastern campaign, sent for Cleopatra again. They met in Antioch in Syria. It had been 4 years. The twins were now toddlers who had never met their father. The reunion at Antioch changed the nature of their relationship. It was no longer just a strategic alliance. It became a permanent union. Antony acknowledged the twins as his children. He also bestowed upon Cleopatra vast new territories, parts of Phoenicia, Judea, and Arabia. This was a massive expansion of Egyptian power. Cleopatra was restoring the glory of the early Ptolemaic Empire. But the cost was high. She had to bankroll Antony's invasion of Parthia. The Parthian campaign of 36 BCE was intended to be Antony's crowning glory, the victory that would prove him superior to Octavian. It was a disaster. Antony marched into Media Atropatene, modern Iran, with a massive army, but he overextended his supply lines. The Parthian cavalry, famous for their mobility, attacked his baggage train and destroyed his siege engines. Without siege engines, Antony couldn't take the key fortresses. Winter was approaching. He was forced to retreat through the mountains of Armenia in freezing conditions, harassed constantly by Parthian archers. By the time he staggered back to Roman territory, he had lost perhaps 24,000 men, not in a glorious battle, but to hunger, cold, disease. He was broken. He waited on the Syrian coast for Cleopatra to arrive with supplies. Ancient sources describe him sitting by the sea, drinking heavily, scanning the horizon for Egyptian sails. When she arrived, she brought clothing, money, and food for the survivors. She didn't reproach him. She didn't withdraw her support. This was a crucial moment. A fair-weather ally would have cut ties with a defeated general. Cleopatra doubled down. She understood that a weakened Antony was even more dependent on her. Antony never returned to Rome. He never returned to Octavia. He went back to Alexandria with Cleopatra. From this point on, the lines between Roman general and Egyptian consort began to blur completely. Chapter 16. The Donations of Alexandria. In 34 BCE, Antony celebrated a triumph. Usually, triumphs were held in Rome, marching up the Via Sacra to the Temple of Jupiter. Antony held his in Alexandria. It was a direct insult to Roman tradition, but what followed was even more shocking to the Senate back home. In the gymnasium of Alexandria, a massive crowd gathered. 2 golden thrones were set up on a silver dais for Antony and Cleopatra. Smaller thrones were placed for their children. Antony was dressed as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis. In a ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria, they distributed the kingdoms of the East among their family. Cleopatra was proclaimed Queen of Kings. Her son Caesarion was proclaimed King of Kings and acknowledged as the true son of Julius Caesar. This was a direct political attack on Octavian. If Caesarion was Caesar's true son, then Octavian, who was merely adopted, was a usurper. The 3 children of Antony and Cleopatra were given vast territories. Alexander Helios was named King of Armenia, Media, and Parthia, territories Antony hadn't even conquered yet. Cleopatra Selene was named Queen of Cyrene and Libya. The youngest, Ptolemy Philadelphus, was named King of Phoenicia, Syria, and Cilicia. To the people of Alexandria, this was a glorious restoration of their empire. To Rome, it was madness. A Roman general was giving away Roman provinces to a foreign woman and her illegitimate children. He was behaving not like a magistrate of the Republic, but like an Oriental despot. Octavian, watching from Rome, couldn't have scripted it better. He had been struggling to find a way to attack Antony without starting another unpopular civil war. Antony was still a Roman hero to many, a veteran, a colleague. But now Antony had handed Octavian the perfect weapon. This wasn't a war between Romans, Octavian could argue. This was a war to save Rome from being enslaved by a foreign sorceress who had bewitched their general. Chapter 17. The Propaganda War. The years leading up to the final conflict were fought not with swords, but with words. Octavian was a master of propaganda. He was arguably the first politician in history to fully understand the power of controlling the narrative. He launched a campaign of character assassination against Cleopatra that was so successful it still shapes how we see her today. His poets and speechwriters painted a picture of Antony as a man emasculated, a drunkard who had lost his Roman soul. He was portrayed as a slave to Cleopatra's whims. Cleopatra was depicted as a dangerous monster, a fatale monstrum. She was the decadent Eastern queen who wanted to rule Rome from the capital. Rumors were whispered in the forum. She used magic. She was poisoning Antony. She planned to enslave the Senate. In 32 BCE, Octavian pulled off his most dramatic stunt. He illegally seized Antony's will from the Temple of the Vesta Virgins and read it aloud to the Senate. The document, whether real or forged is still debated, allegedly stated that Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, not in Rome. For a Roman, this was the ultimate betrayal. To reject the soil of Italy for the sand of Egypt was unforgivable. The Senate was outraged. Public opinion turned. Octavian was careful, though. He never declared war on Antony. That would still be civil war. Instead, he went to the Temple of Bellona in Rome and performed the ancient ritual of declaring war against a foreign enemy. He declared war on Cleopatra, alone. It was a brilliant political maneuver. It stripped Antony of his legal status without naming him. If Antony fought for Cleopatra, he was fighting for a foreign enemy against his own country. The trap was set. Chapter 18. Preparing for Actium. By 31 BCE, the entire Mediterranean was mobilized for war. Antony and Cleopatra moved their headquarters to Greece. They commanded a massive force, 500 ships, 100,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry. It was the largest military gathering the ancient world had ever seen. Egypt provided the bulk of the funding and the fleet. Cleopatra insisted on being present at headquarters. This caused immense tension. Antony's Roman officers hated it. They urged him to send her back to Egypt, argued that her presence hurt morale, that Roman soldiers wouldn't fight for a woman. One officer famously told Antony, "Send her away and fight on land." But Antony couldn't send her away. She was the paymaster. Without her gold, the army wouldn't eat. Without her ships, he had no navy. And perhaps he simply couldn't bear to be without her. Octavian and his brilliant admiral, Agrippa, moved their forces across the Adriatic to the western coast of Greece. They didn't attack head-on. Instead, Agrippa used his faster ships to cut off Antony's supply lines. He captured the supply depots. He blockaded the Gulf of Ambracia, where Antony's fleet was anchored. The stalemate dragged on for months. Summer heat set in. Malaria broke out in Antony's camp. Supplies ran low. Morale plummeted. Important Roman senators and client kings began to defect to Octavian. Every morning, Antony would wake up to find another empty tent, another ally gone. Antony tried to provoke a land battle, but Octavian refused to bite. He was content to let hunger and disease do the work. By late summer, the situation was desperate. Antony and Cleopatra held a council of war. They had two choices: abandon the fleet and retreat inland with the army, trying to escape back to the east, or risk everything on a naval breakout. Cleopatra argued for the fleet. If they abandoned the ships, Egypt was open to invasion. The fleet was her kingdom's only real defense. They decided to fight at sea. But it wasn't a plan for victory. It was a plan for escape. 19. The Battle of Actium, September 2nd, 31 BCE. The morning broke clear and calm. The sea was smooth. Antony's fleet moved out of the Gulf. His ships were massive quinquiremes, floating fortresses with high towers, reinforced hulls, and heavy grappling irons. They were designed to smash and board. Octavian's ships, commanded by Agrippa, were smaller, lighter, and faster. Liburnians. They couldn't ram Antony's monsters, but they could swarm them. For hours, the two fleets faced each other. Neither side wanted to make the first move. Finally, around noon, a breeze sprang up. The fleets engaged. It was a chaotic, grinding battle. Agrippa's ships buzzed around Antony's heavy vessels, darting in to attack oars and retreating before the grappling hooks could catch them. Cleopatra's squadron, 60 Egyptian warships, held back behind the main line, guarding the war chest. Then, in the mid-afternoon, something happened that historians have argued about for 2 millennia. A gap opened in Octavian's line. Suddenly, Cleopatra's flagship hoisted its sails. Her squadron picked up speed and drove straight through the gap, sailing away from the battle, heading south into open water. She was leaving. Seeing her sail away, Antony did the unthinkable. he abandoned his flagship. He jumped into a smaller, faster boat and chased after her. He left his fleet, his army, and his honor behind. When he caught up to Cleopatra's ship, he was brought aboard. He didn't speak to her. Ancient sources say he went to the prow of the ship and sat alone, his head in his hands, staring at the water. Back at Actium, the battle raged on until evening. Antony's leaderless fleet fought bravely, but eventually they surrendered. A few days later, his land army, realizing their commander had abandoned them, negotiated peace with Octavian. The war was effectively over. Was it a betrayal? Did Cleopatra panic? Modern naval historians suggest it was a prearranged breakout. They argue the battle was already lost, or at least unwinnable, and the goal had always been to save the treasury and the fleet to defend Egypt. If so, it was a successful extraction. But the political cost was fatal. Antony was no longer a general, he was a fugitive. Chapter 20. The Last Year. They returned to Alexandria, was quiet. The end was coming, and everyone knew it. Antony went into seclusion, built a small hermitage on the edge of the harbor, and lived there alone for a while, calling himself Timon, after the famous misanthrope of Athens. Cleopatra, however, didn't have the luxury of self-pity. She was still a queen. She tried to prepare. She reportedly experimented with poisons to find a painless death. She planned to drag her remaining ships across the desert to the Red Sea to escape to India, but Nabatean raiders burned them. She sent Caesarion away to the south, toward Ethiopia, hoping to get him out of Octavian's reach. Eventually, Antony returned to the palace. They dissolved their Society of Inimitable Livers and formed a new one, the Society of Those Who Will Die Together. It was a grim joke, but also a commitment. They would face the end as they had lived, with style and defiance. In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's forces approached Egypt from two directions. Antony led a final, desperate cavalry charge outside the gates of Alexandria. He actually won, a minor skirmish. He returned to the palace and embraced Cleopatra, armed and covered in dust. But it was a false hope. The next day, as Antony watched, his remaining fleet surrendered to Octavian. His cavalry defected. The game was up. Chapter 21. The Deaths. The sequence of events in August 30 BCE is confused, likely because Octavian's people rewrote the official reports. But the tragic outline is clear. Antony, believing a false report that Cleopatra had already committed suicide, decided to follow her. He fell on his sword, but he botched it. The wound was fatal but not immediate. As he lay bleeding, begging his servants to finish him off, news arrived. Cleopatra was still alive. She had barricaded herself in her mausoleum, a heavy stone tomb she had built near the temple of Isis. Antony asked to be taken to her. The doors of the mausoleum were sealed and couldn't be opened. So, Cleopatra and her two maids lowered ropes from an upper window. In a scene of horrific pathos, Queen of Egypt struggled to haul her dying lover up the side of the building. Antony died in her arms. Octavian entered the city. He sent men to secure Cleopatra. He needed her alive. He wanted to display her in his triumph in Rome, the ultimate trophy. They captured her in the mausoleum, disarming her before she could use a dagger. For a few days, she was Octavian's prisoner. They met once. Octavian was cold, polite, and unyielding. He promised her she would be treated well. But Cleopatra wasn't naive. She knew what treated well meant. It meant chains, a cage, and a parade through the Roman Forum. She would not be a trophy. On August 12, 30 BCE, she managed to arrange her own exit. The story of the asp, the cobra hidden in a basket of figs, is the one we all know. It has poetic resonance. The cobra was the symbol of Egyptian royalty, the uraeus that protected the sun god. To die by the snake was to die a divine death. But historians suspect it might have been poison carried in, a hollow hairpin or a comb. A snake is unpredictable. Poison is science. and Cleopatra was a master of potions. When Octavian's men broke into her chamber, they found her lying on a golden couch, dressed in her royal regalia. She was dead. Her two handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, were dying beside her. One of the guards angrily asked Charmian, "Is this well done?" Charmian, straightening the queen's diadem with her dying breath, replied, "It is extremely well done, and befitting a queen descended from so many kings." Chapter 22. Egypt after Cleopatra. With Cleopatra's last breath, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. 3,000 years of pharaonic rule effectively ceased. Octavian annexed Egypt, but he didn't just make it a normal province. He made it the personal property of the emperor. No Roman senator was allowed to even set foot in Egypt without his permission. Its wealth was simply too great. The grain of the Nile would feed the mobs of Rome and keep the emperors in power for centuries. But there was still the matter of the children. Antony and Cleopatra's 3 children were taken to Rome. They were marched in Octavian's triumph, walking in the parade their mother had died to avoid. Heavy gold chains weighed down their small bodies. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus disappear from history shortly after. They likely died of illness or were quietly eliminated. Cleopatra Selene, the daughter, survived. She was raised by Octavia, Antony's Roman wife, which says something remarkable about Octavia's character. Selene eventually married the king of Mauritania, modern Morocco, and became a great queen in her own right, keeping her mother's memory alive in her own court. But for Caesarion, Julius Caesar's son, there was no mercy. He was betrayed by his tutor while trying to flee to India. Octavian ordered his execution. His logic was cold and memorable. 2 Caesars is one too many. Chapter 23. Roman Memory and Propaganda. Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. To build his new regime, he needed a foundational myth. The war couldn't be about his naked ambition. It had to be about saving Rome from the Eastern menace. So the Roman poets went to work. Virgil, Horace, Propertius, the greatest writers of the age, wrote poems celebrating the victory at Actium. They cast Cleopatra not as a politician, but as a drunkard, a whore, a sorceress. She was the anti-Rome, irrational, emotional, excessive. Horace wrote a famous ode that begins, "Nunc est bibendum." Now is the time for drinking, celebrating her death. But even the propaganda couldn't completely hide her greatness. Horace, in the very same poem, admits she was no humble woman in death. He admires her courage in suicide. The Romans were fascinated by her. They hated her, but they couldn't stop talking about her. Statues of her remained standing in Rome for centuries. This Roman version of Cleopatra, the dangerous, sexy, doomed beauty, became the only version that survived. The Egyptian records were lost or ignored. We see her through the eyes of the men who defeated her. Chapter 24. Medieval Transformations. Centuries passed. The Roman Empire fell. In the Middle Ages, Cleopatra underwent another transformation. To Christian Europe, she became a morality tale. In the writings of Chaucer and Dante, she appears. Sometimes she is a cautionary tale of lust and pagan excess. Dante places her in the second circle of hell, the circle of the lustful, buffeted by eternal storms. But in other medieval romances, she becomes a tragic heroine of courtly love. The focus shifted entirely to the love story. The politics, the languages, the naval command, all that was forgotten. She became a symbol of love that conquers death. Painters began to depict her death, but they got the details wrong. They showed her standing up, the snake biting her breast. It became an excuse to paint nude women under the guise of history. She was slowly being stripped of her intellect and reduced to her body. Chapter 25. Renaissance and Shakespeare. Then came the Renaissance, and with it, a rediscovery of Plutarch's lives. William Shakespeare read a translation of Plutarch and wrote Antony and Cleopatra in 1606. Shakespeare did something remarkable. He didn't just copy the Roman propaganda, he breathed human life back into her. His Cleopatra is difficult, vain, and theatrical, but she is also majestic, brilliant, and infinitely complex. He gave her the famous line describing her infinite variety. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Shakespeare understood what the Romans had tried to hide, that her power came from her personality, her mind, her ability to be everything to everyone. But even Shakespeare focused on the tragic lover, not the administrator who balanced the grain budget. Chapter 26. Victorian Cleopatra. In the 19th century, the British Empire occupied Egypt. Suddenly, Cleopatra was relevant again. Victorian England looked at ancient Rome and saw itself, the rational, masculine empire governing the exotic, feminine East. Cleopatra became a symbol of the Orient, mysterious, dangerous, and in need of control. Victorian artists painted her in impossibly lavish settings, lounging on tiger skins, surrounded by dark-skinned servants. These paintings were fantasies of imperial dominance. They emphasized her cruelty. Stories circulated that she tested poisons on slaves for fun, or that she killed her lovers after one night. These were myths, but they fit the Victorian idea of the barbaric East. It was the ultimate dehumanization. She wasn't a ruler anymore. She was a caricature of exotic excess. Chapter 27. Hollywood's Cleopatra. And finally, the 20th century. The camera invented a new kind of immortality. Theda Bara, the silent film star, played her as a vamp, a supernatural seductress who eats men alive. Claudette Colbert played her as a witty Art Deco flapper, queen. But the image that stuck, the image that appears in your mind when I say her name, is Elizabeth Taylor. The 1963 movie Cleopatra was a phenomenon. It was the most expensive movie ever made. The scandal of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton falling in love on set mirrored the story of Antony and Cleopatra perfectly. The film is a spectacle of gold and blue eyeshadow, but it solidified the idea that Cleopatra's story is primarily a romance, a tragedy of a woman who loved too much. It's a beautiful story, but it's not the whole truth. Chapter 28. Cleopatra Today. Legacy and Truth. So, who was she really? Modern archaeology and scholarship have begun to scrape away the layers of paint, propaganda, and fantasy. We look at the coins minted during her reign. They don't show a Hollywood beauty. They show a woman with a strong, hooked nose, a prominent chin, and a look of fierce determination. She looks like her father. She looks like a ruler. We look at the papyrus scrolls, receipts, and decrees signed by her bureaucracy. We see a queen who was deeply involved in the minutiae of governing, who managed the irrigation of the Nile, who devalued the currency to fight inflation. We see a mother who fought ferociously to secure a legacy for her 4 children. We see a scholar who could converse with the greatest minds of her age. Cleopatra VII was the last survivor of a dying world. She stood at the pivot point of history, attempting to hold back the tide of Roman expansion through sheer force of will and intellect. She failed. But in her failure, she achieved a kind of victory that even Augustus couldn't have imagined. He defeated her army. He annexed her kingdom. He ended her dynasty. But he could not make us forget her. Tonight, 2,000 years later, while the names of the Roman senators who condemned her are dust and silence, we are still talking about the Queen of Egypt. She remains, as she always intended, to be inimitable. As you drift off to sleep, leave the snakes and the gold behind. Remember instead the quiet scratching of a reed pen on papyrus in the great library, a lamp burning late into the night, a woman working, thinking, planning, trying to save her world. Good night.